everybody. Welcome again, and thank you for coming. So we are in Mark's Gospel. We've been in Mark's Gospel for, I was looking at about a year and a half almost, give or take. And so, but we're there, we're in Mark 15. There's only one more chapter, and it's super short. And so, I've said this before, but Mark's Gospel, the entire thing, it functions like a slide, right? At the beginning, we're going. I mean, Jesus is immediately doing this and that. He's healing, he's doing miracles, walking on water, all sorts of stuff. And then right around the midpoint, Mark chapter 8, things kind of start to slow down. And after Mark chapter 8, everything's focused on the Passover, right? Mark says 4 weeks before Passover, 3 weeks before. We get these timestamps, 2 weeks, 1 week, and then it's days, 5 days before Passover, 3 days before the feast, right? We get all these time markers, and then like we just did all the way through Mark 14, he breaks it down into 3-hour increments, right? The 4 watches of the night. And we looked at those. It's Passover itself with Jesus and his disciples in the upper room. That's from 6 to 9. From 9 to midnight is Jesus praying in the garden, and Judas betrays him with a kiss. And then from midnight to 3 a.m. is when he is on the trial for his life with the Sanhedrin, and Peter disowns him or denies that he even knows him. And then from 3 to 6, he's standing in front of the angry mob, and Pontius Pilate sentences him to crucifixion. And so Jesus now stands condemned to death, and the slide is gonna peter off, right? And we've got a few more timestamps, but Mark's gonna give us the last details of Jesus' life. And as the slide kind of goes to a stop, Mark is just gonna give us these snapshots, right? These little snapshots. We don't spend a lot of time. It's like we just get these little scenes, and that's it. But there is a sequence to the events, and he doesn't stay very long on anything. But one detail that does kind of get repeated over and over again is that Jesus is crucified as King of the Jews, right? The kingship of Jesus gets elevated. Everything that happens from Mark 15, 16 through 20 is mirroring what normally would have taken place when a welcoming king would come, right? And you're going to see this strange inverse, because there is honor in pageantry, but it's interesting because Jesus is simultaneously being claimed as king and yet rejected as king at the same time. And it's all done with irony and mockery. And so let's read this together here. Mark 15, 16. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that's the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him. Yeah, that's what you do to a king. Then they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And again they struck him in the head with the staff, and they spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. And then they led him out to crucify him. So yeah, you got the purple robe, you've got a crown, but it's a crown of thorns. Instead of handing him a scepter, they beat him with it. Instead of kissing his feet, they spit on his face. And they kneel and they pay homage to him, but it's mockery. It's the right words, but it's the wrong tone. They kneel in reverence before this foreign king who's destined to become greater than any emperor of Rome, any emperor of any world, this world. But they didn't know that. They didn't see that. The next scene is Simon of Cyrene, a little snapshot of Simon. After a long night of being tortured, Jesus physically cannot carry his cross through the streets of Jerusalem. Jesus has been teaching ever since Caesarea Philippi. Mark chapter 8, he's been teaching about cross carrying. He's been talking about it, how it's a symbol of discipleship, total submission to God. Jesus' cross symbolizes his own submission to what God desires, even his death. And to the Roman soldiers, Simon is no more or no less than just an unwilling temporary slave conscripted by Rome just to carry the cross. History would have easily forgotten him. But for the follower of Jesus, for the reader of Mark's gospel, all of a sudden Simon is us. Simon is a true follower. Literally taking Jesus' cross with him side by side up to his death. Let's read this in verse 21. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, here's Mark naming names, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. So the soldiers, they reached Golgotha. They offered Jesus wine mixed with myrrh, right, to dull the pain, deaden the pain, but he refuses to drink it. He wants to drink the full cup of God's wrath to the dregs. They strip him. Jesus is more than likely naked on the cross. We don't know, but knowing the Romans, that's just one more dig, one more way to completely humiliate, completely shame a person. Verse 25, we get a timestamp. It's the third hour when they crucify our King. That's 9 a.m. Mark tells us, pretty factually, we don't get a lot of description, we don't get a lot of emotion, but if you read this next section, it's loaded with symbolism, irony, double messages. If you scratch a little, so there's like this surface level reading, just the facts, but then if you just dig a little deeper, there's so much happening at the cross. Let's see if you can catch any of them as we walk through this next snapshot. Verse 25. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right, the other on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who were going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross, save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross that we may see and believe." Those who crucified with him also heaped insults at him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. So the sign above Jesus, right? Definitely meant to be a jab, right? That this is your king, the King of the Jews. It's right. It is right, but it's done in mocking. The 2 criminals that were dying with him, these are the places that the disciples were fighting about for years. I want to be at your right and your left when you come into your glory. This is that. This is Jesus coming into his glory. And his disciples are gone. They're nowhere to be found. Criminals. Insurrectionists. And what about this ominous, strange fact that darkness came over the land from noon till 3? So in all the descriptions of Jesus' death, in all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the authors show a consistent concern about what artists talk about values, right? It's this interplay between light and darkness, if you're into art. But all four gospel authors really try to show us that the critical events of Jesus' death happened in the darkness, right? I mean, we've already named them, but Jesus getting betrayed by a friend, the trial before the Sanhedrin, and Peter denying him, and now the actual moment of Jesus' death. Though it's daytime, and I've told you, like, everything's upside down. Everything is not as it should be. This is the most dramatic of that. It's daytime, noon to 3, the brightest time of the day, where it should be light. It's darkness. Now, many people have proposed so many things over the years. This could be an eclipse, right? In 2017, I think I remember going to Bridgeport or Alliance for the full. It was beautiful, but it lasted minutes, not hours. It can't be an eclipse, and for all sorts of other reasons. The Passover, it's done during the full moon, so. That scientifically can't be it. Other people think a windstorm, right? Wind, dust, and just kind of, and we've seen some of that before, maybe just like a hazy darkness. But again, Passover is during the wet season. Again, I mean, Mark builds his whole thing Passover. And so we know that it's Passover. So that doesn't make any sense either. This was supernatural darkness. That is the only explanation. In the Bible, darkness during the day is a recognized sign of God's displeasure and judgment. The supreme example of this is found in Exodus at the first Passover. The plague of the first Passover. And so when darkness fell, we know that God is acting in judgment, but who is God judging? That's the question. Let's read again, verse 33. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, and at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus here, I don't know if you know, he's quoting Psalm 22. That's how Psalm 22 starts, is with David. If you want to think about and feel what Jesus was going through on the cross, read Psalm 22. It's real, it's raw, it's emotional. It's the cry of a broken, dying man. My God, my God. It's language of intimacy. To call anyone, my Susan or my John, it's affectionate, right? My God. It's seen as covenantal, right? In the book of Exodus, when God comes to his people, he says, I want to be you. I want you to be my people. I want me to be your God. Right? It's this covenantal language. My God, you have forsaken me. If after today's church service you came up to me and said, Kyle, I don't ever want to see you or talk to you or see you. I don't want to have anything to do with you ever again. That would hurt. I would just be like, ouch. But I would move on, right? I would live through that. If my wife came up to me after this service and said, I don't want to see you, I don't want to talk to you ever again, you're dead to me, that would be a different story. I wouldn't know how to function after that. The longer the love, the deeper the love, the greater the torment of the loss. But this forsakenness, this loss was between Father and Son from all eternity. The love was infinitely long, absolutely perfect, and Jesus was losing it. Jesus, the maker of the world, is being unmade right here at this moment. It's the cry of Job. It's the cry of humanity. It's what the God-man Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And why? Why? Because Jesus was experiencing our judgment. My God, why have you forsaken me? It's not a rhetorical question. The answer is for me and for you, for us. Jesus was forsaken by God so that we would never have to be. The judgment that should have fallen on us fell on him. Tim Keller has a wonderful insight into this idea of spiritual darkness. Most of us have never been in true, utter darkness. Even if you live in the country, I mean, there's electric lights, or you can see the light of the city. If you've ever been in a cave, that might be the closest we've ever come, where you cannot see your hand in front of your face. If you stay in that darkness for very long, it has profound effects on you. Ernest Shackleton, in 1914, there was this British explorer, Ernest Shackleton. Maybe you've heard of him. He took his crew, he took this ship across the Antarctica, and their plan was to actually cross the Antarctica, across the South Pole. Walk across it, if it was their plan. But they had to abandon their plan because their ship, the Endurance, caught some polar ice and actually was crushed. But over a period of months, Shackleton's crew had to learn to survive and get home. And one of Shackleton's biographers says that of all the difficulties they faced, all right, in the polar place, including starvation, frigid temperatures, dehydration, the worst by far is maybe something you wouldn't guess. It was the darkness. The darkness was just absolute. Near the South Pole, the sun goes down from mid-May. It doesn't come up again until late July. That's 2 whole months of utter darkness. The polar night is desolate, and you do not understand it unless you've experienced it. It has driven people crazy, truly. Men went mad because of it. In such deep darkness, you can't see forward. You don't know where you're going. You have no direction. You can't see yourself. You don't know what you look like. You may as well lose your identity. You can't tell if anyone's around you or not, friend or foe. You don't know. You can't see. You're isolated. Physical darkness brings disorientation, but according to the Bible, so does spiritual darkness. Spiritual darkness comes when we willingly turn away from God and make something else the center of our life. You see, again, humans are made, we are designed to worship God. We're made for him to be our center. Like the sun orbits, or like we orbit around the sun, we are made to orbit around God. If you orbit around God, then your life has truth and vitality. You are in the light, right? The Gospel of John talks about that. But if you turn away from God, if you orbit around anything other than God, your career, your relationships, kids, good things, a hobby, a deep passion, if you let that be your center, what you orbit around, the result is spiritual darkness. You are turning away from truth, away from life, towards darkness. And the crazy thing about spiritual darkness is you think you're okay. you think you're on the right path. You've got goals, you've got a vision, right? You're doing everything right, but you're disoriented. You're profoundly disoriented. If anything but God is more important to you, you've got a problem with your direction. And again, you can be chasing hard after these things. And you have hope, and you're living for something, and it's good. But if you actually get what you're seeking, you will find that it's not enough to feed your soul. It's not big enough. It does not produce its own light. Also, if you center on anything other than God, then you lose your identity. Your identity will be fragile and insecure because it's based on things that are fragile and insecure. It's based on human approval. It's based on how you perform. It's based on what you have. You don't really know who you are. In the darkness, you can't see yourself. In the darkness, you're isolated. You're wrapped up in things that you're living for, and if you're honest, you're always scared. You're always full of fear. You're always angry or proud or driven or full of self-pity. And that just makes you more isolated from other people. This is the big picture of what life is like post Genesis 3. This is it. If it's just up to us with no intervention from God, then we would stay in the darkness. All of us would be orbiting around something else, seeking to glorify ourselves instead of God. Left to ourselves, we would just be in utter darkness forever. That's what we would do. This is the trajectory that humans are on. And the Bible says that trajectory, it won't stop with death. When God returns, he'll judge everything. Everything. Every action, every thought, every longing, everything our heart has ever produced. If there's anything imperfect, then we will not be able to remain in the light of his presence. And being out of the presence of God, which is the presence of all light and truth, means utter darkness. Eternal disintegration. Darkness, weeping, and gnashing of teeth. Does that sound familiar? The biblical prophets, they talked about this. They described the day of judgment, the final day of judgment. In Isaiah 13, let's just read this. Isaiah 13. See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellation will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. It will punish the world for its sin, the wickedness for the sins or for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty and will humble the pride of the ruthless. I will make people scarcer than pure gold, more rare than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble and the earth will shake from its place. And at the wrath of the Lord Almighty in the day of the burning anger. And then also, here's another one. Amos, chapter 8, 7 through 10. I just want to read this too. The Lord has sworn by himself, the pride of Jacob, I will never forget anything they've done. Will not the land tremble for this, and all who live in it mourn? The whole land will rise like the Nile. It will be stirred up and then sink like the rivers of Egypt. In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn their religious festivals into mourning and all the singing into weeping. I will make all of you wear sackcloth and shave your heads. I will make that time like mourning for an only son, and the end of it like a bitter day. This is humanity's trajectory. This is the road we're on. And Jesus' death was the only way to alter it. This is why Jesus had to go to the cross. He died the death that we should have died so that we could get saved from the judgment and instead live in the light of God's presence. And how do we know it worked? Let's go back to Mark, verse 35, chapter 15, verse 35. When some of them standing near him heard this, and again, when he says Eloi, Eloi, right, that sort of sounds like Elijah's name. So they say, listen, he's calling Elijah. Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. His disciples aren't there, right? His friends that were with him for 3 years every day. His disciples aren't there. God's not there. And even Elijah, who's known as the patron saint of lost causes, he doesn't show up. Verse 37. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And then the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died and said, surely this man was the Son of God. Now it's remarkable. So remember the temple. Like all of a sudden we're at Golgotha, but then Mark takes us to the temple. And not just the temple, the Holy of Holies. This is a thick, heavy curtain that separated God from the rest of the people. It separated, the Shekinah glory of God's presence. And remember, only one holy man, the high priest, from the holiest nation, the Jews, could enter the Holy of Holies, and only on the holiest day of the year, which was Yom Kippur. And he had to bring a blood sacrifice, an atonement for the sins. And so if we just looked at the curtain said loudly and clearly, it's impossible for anyone sinful, anyone in spiritual darkness to come into God's presence. At the moment Jesus dies, this massive curtain split right down the top. Just like someone ripping a piece of paper, right, from top to bottom, so everyone would know who did it. Right? This was not a man-made thing. This was God. And in a way, he's saying this is the sacrifice that ends all the sacrifices. The way now is open for anyone to come. Now that Jesus dies, anyone who believes in him can see God, can connect with God, can talk with God, can walk with God. The barrier is gone. Our trajectory has been permanently redirected to God again. And it's only possible because Jesus paid the price for our sin. Anybody can go in. And to make that point crystal clear, Mark says something amazing. He says, a Roman centurion, the bad guy, the one that is the furthest away from anything good, the furthest away from what God's about, God's people. These are written for Jews. And we see a Roman centurion utter the truth. Surely this is the Son of God. Now what's remarkable, guys, a year and a half ago we looked at this. At the start of the book of Mark, the opening verse says, this is the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. In Mark chapter 8, Peter stumbles upon that Jesus is the Christ. Who do you say I am, Peter? You are the Messiah. Gold star, Peter. Good job. But up until now, no human gets that Jesus isn't just the Messiah. Jesus is, yes, the Messiah, but also the Son of God, divine. No one gets it except for a Roman centurion, a guy that shouldn't get it, an outsider. The bad guy gets it. The one you wouldn't expect. The one who presided over countless deaths. A hard man. States the truth. Jesus is the Son of God. Man, so I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you think you've done. If a Roman centurion can get it, friends, anyone can. Prostitutes, sinners, pastors, anybody. It's open for anybody and everybody. There's forgiveness, there's grace, there's mercy. Everybody stand if we could, and I'll pray us out here. Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, the Anointed One, the Son of God, name above every name. You made a way when there was no way. You are the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Thank you. Thank you that the curtain was torn. Thank you that we have a way back. Thank you for Simon of Cyrene. Thank you for the Roman centurion. And we're somewhere in there, God. We're somewhere in between those poles. The follower of Christ who even picks up the cross, and then the outsider that utters the truth, God. We're somewhere in there. Thank you for your grace. It is amazing. And now to him who's able to do infinitely more than all we can ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever and ever. Amen. God bless you.